Welcome to another deep dive today. And this one is really exciting.
Yeah, this one is really special.
We're going to be talking about a painting.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably one that you've seen before.
Oh, I'm sure.
Even if you don't know that you know it, you've probably seen it.
Definitely iconic.
It's Botticelli's Birth of Venus.
One of the most famous paintings of the Italian Renaissance.
So this painting is everywhere.
You see it on like tote bags and coffee mugs and posters.
But have you ever stopped to think why?
Like, what is it about this painting that is so captivating?
Why has this image persisted for centuries?
Like, what's the story behind this enduring appeal?
Yeah, so, most people at least recognize the image of Venus, the goddess of love and beauty,
Right.
standing, on that giant scallop shell.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the actual moment
Yeah, what's he depicting?
that Botticelli's depicting?
Well, he's captured the moment right after Venus is born,
Okay.
fully grown,
Okay.
emerging from the sea.
So not like a little baby Venus.
No.
Okay.
She's born this like full-fledged goddess.
Wow.
It's a classic image from Greek mythology.
Okay.
It's called Venus Anadyomene.
Venus Anadyomene.
Yeah. But Botticelli, he doesn't just like retell the myth.
Okay.
He elevates it,
Okay.
like way beyond a simple retelling.
So there's something more going on.
Way more. He packs it with symbolism
Okay.
and meaning, making it so much more.
Then a pretty picture.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've got Venus there. She's obviously like front and center in this painting.
She's the star of the show.
She's the star of the show.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some other figures there that are also kind of intriguing.
Right.
So what can you tell us about them? Like, for example, the wind god on the left.
Yeah. So that's Zephyr.
Zephyr?
And he's actually carrying a nymph.
Oh.
And they're both blowing Venus towards the shore.
They're working together.
It's a team effort.
Yeah.
And the nymph. It's most likely Aura, who represents a gentle breeze. But some scholars think she could be Chloris, a flower nymph that Zephyr marries in some versions of the myth.
Oh, okay. So it's not totally certain.
I'm totally certain.
But either way, it's Zephyr and a nymph
Yes.
flowing her towards the shore.
Yeah.
And then there's another figure. There's one on the right,
Mm-hmm.
kind of holding out like a cloak or a robe.
Right.
Is that for Venus?
Exactly. She's one of the Horae,
Ooh,
the goddesses of the
oh,
seasons.
okay.
This one, judging by the floral dress she's wearing, is probably the Hora of spring.
Okay.
And notice how the wind from Zephyr is whipping through the whole scene,
Oh, yeah.
like their hair and garments.
It's very flowy.
Yeah, it gives you the sense of movement and
You
energy.
can just feel it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of details, what about the location?
Yes.
Does that have some significance?
So the shore, it's probably meant to be either Cythera or Cyprus, both islands associated with Venus in Greek mythology. So even the setting isn't just a random backdrop.
Right.
It's another layer
Another layer
of symbolism. Each element is very carefully chosen to make you think.
to make you dig deeper.
Exactly.
And then there's the way he paints her,
Yeah.
Botticelli's style.
Mhm.
It's not quite what I would picture when I think like typical Renaissance art.
Right. It's more delicate. It's more ethereal.
Ethereal. Yeah.
And it's this amazing blend of classical and Gothic elements.
Okay.
So Venus's pose, for example,
Mm-hmm.
is rooted in classical sculpture.
Okay.
But the overall feel, her elongated figure, those flowing lines, there's a distinctly Gothic sensibility there.
Interesting.
Like he's taking inspiration from multiple sources,
Okay.
creating something totally new.
Now, the art historian Kenneth Clark,
Yes.
he said that Venus looks like she's floating, not standing.
That's a good way to put it.
And he was really captivated by how Botticelli captured that feeling of ecstatic movement, especially in Zephyr and the Nymph.
Right. They're like suspended in midair.
Yeah, and it really does look like that. But I did notice that some of the details,
Yeah.
they aren't quite right.
What do you mean?
Anatomically,
Oh, yeah.
like Venus's proportions,
Mm-hmm.
they're a little off.
Yeah.
Like nobody's casting shadows.
That's true.
And those bulrushes in the foreground,
Yeah, those are a problem.
those are freshwater plants.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't find those by the seashore.
Definitely not.
So is Botticelli just taking artistic liberties here?
Well, he's playing with reality,
Okay.
but there's a purpose behind it.
Okay.
He's deliberately emphasizing the dreamlike, otherworldly quality of the scene. He doesn't want you to think that you're looking at real life.
Okay.
He wants to transport you to this realm of imagination and myth.
Okay. So like those details that I was pointing out,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of add to that effect.
Right. The shimmering gold highlights and the stylized ways and the way the landscape stretches out beyond the frame, it all reinforces that dreamlike feeling.
All right, so we've got this beautiful goddess,
Mm-hmm.
an intriguing cast of characters,
Right.
this ethereal, dreamlike setting. But what does it all mean?
The million-dollar question.
Right, like what was Botticelli trying to say with this painting?
Unfortunately, the painting doesn't come with an instruction manual.
Right.
So that's led to a lot of debate over the years.
Okay.
And a lot of different interpretations. But for a long time, the most popular theory among art historians was that it reflected the ideas of Neoplatonism.
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 Okay, I didn't major in Renaissance philosophy, so could you break that down for us?
Sure. So basically, it was a philosophical movement
Okay.
that drew on the ideas of the ancient Greek philosopher Plato.
Okay.
And one of the key concepts was this idea of dual Venuses.
Dual Venuses.
Yeah. So Venus as the goddess of earthly physical love. And then Venus as a symbol of intellectual or spiritual love.
So like two sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
Okay.
And according to this Neoplatonic interpretation, the idea was that by contemplating the physical beauty of Venus in the painting,
Okay.
the viewer could be elevated to a higher understanding of spiritual beauty.
Oh, wow.
So it's like using the earthly to reach the divine. Beauty as a pathway to enlightenment.
So you're telling me that just by looking at this painting, people back then could have a spiritual experience.
That was the idea, and it gets even more interesting when you look at the composition. It's surprisingly similar to how artists traditionally depicted the baptism of Christ.
Oh, wow.
So some scholars see a parallel there between Christ's ministry and Venus's ministry of love, both having earthly and spiritual dimensions.
Well, that's really interesting. Okay, so you said that the Neoplatonic view was the dominant one.
For a long time.
For a long time. But what are some of the other ways that people have interpreted this painting?
Well, in recent years, some scholars have started to question whether Neoplatonic thought was really as influential as we thought in 15th century Florence.
Okay.
So some believe that the painting might be a more straightforward celebration of a wedding,
Oh.
maybe with some subtle messages
Okay.
for the bride and groom.
Okay.
Others think it might be a tribute to the powerful Medici family.
The Medici family.
Yes.
Those were the rulers of Florence.
Right. They basically ran the show in Florence.
Okay.
Big patrons of the art.
Huge patrons of the arts, yeah.
And some people point to the laurel trees in the painting
Okay.
as a possible reference to Lorenzo de' Medici.
Because Laurel kind of sounds like Lorenzo.
Exactly.
That's pretty subtle.
It is. And then there are all those flowers
Okay.
that Zephyr is scattering. Some people think they might be a subtle nod to the city of Florence itself.
Interesting. So we've got Neoplatonism wedding celebrations, possible Medici family connections. It sounds like there's no shortage of theories.
Not at all.
So where do we even go from here?
Well, there's one more theory that's particularly intriguing, and it takes us all the way back to ancient Greece.
Oh. Now I'm really curious. Tell me more.
All right, let's do it. This theory connects Botticelli's painting to an ancient Greek poem, the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite.
Wait, seriously, like Homer, the guy who wrote the Odyssey, that Homer.
The very same. And guess what? A version of this hymn was actually published in Florence just a few years before Botticelli painted The Birth of Venus.
Wow.
And the poem describes Venus arriving on Cyprus, blown by Zephyr and closed by the Horae. Sound familiar?
Yeah. It's like the painting's a visual representation of the poem.
Right.
So you're saying that Botticelli might have been directly inspired by this ancient text?
It's definitely a possibility. We know he was well-versed in classical literature,
Right.
as were many of the intellectuals in his circle. But it goes even deeper than that.
Okay.
Another poet, Angelo Poliziano, who was part of Lorenzo de' Medici's court. He also wrote about the birth of Venus in his poem Stanze per la Giostra. And his version might have had an even bigger impact on Botticelli,
Okay.
even though there are some differences.
Like what?
Well, like his poem has multiple Horae and Zephyrs
Okay.
instead of just one each.
Oh, so like Botticelli's kind of picking and choosing.
Yeah, it's like he's taking these literary sources
Yeah.
and weaving them together into his own unique vision.
This is fascinating. Like a whole web of literary and artistic influences coming together in this one painting.
It is pretty amazing.
Didn't we talk earlier about the influence of classical sculpture
We did.
on Venus's pose?
Yeah, and there's actually another layer to that story.
Okay.
A connection to a legendary ancient Greek painter named Apelles.
Okay, I'm all ears. Who is this Apelles guy?
Well, he was considered one of the greatest painters of ancient Greece,
Okay,
famous for his incredibly lifelike portraits
okay,
and his mastery of color.
okay.
But his most celebrated work was a painting of Venus and a Diamond.
Venus and a Diomede.
Venus rising from the sea. And sadly, it's been lost to history.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we only have descriptions from ancient writers.
What happened to her?
Well, according to Pliny the Elder,
Pliny the Elder.
who was a Roman author,
Okay.
he said that the painting was so stunning that Alexander the Great was blown away by it.
Really?
He was so impressed he actually offered his own mistress, Campaspe, as a model for the nude Venus.
Oh, wow.
And get this, he later gifted Campaspe to Apelles. Talk about a generous patron.
Wow. That's quite a story. So what does this Apelles guy have to do with Botticelli?
Well, even though the original painting is lost, we think Botticelli might have seen Roman copies
Okay.
or adaptations of it,
Okay.
maybe in the form of sculptures or engraved gems.
Okay.
So imagine Botticelli being inspired by echoes of this lost masterpiece.
That's so cool. So those Roman copies acted as a bridge between ancient Greece and the Italian Renaissance.
Exactly. And there's another interesting point about Botticelli's style. You know how his painting seems almost deliberately flat? His figures are almost floating on the surface.
It's very different from the more three-dimensional style of some other Renaissance painters.
Right. Well, some art historians think he might have been intentionally trying to evoke the look of ancient Greek vase painting,
Oh, okay.
or even Etruscan tomb frescoes, which were the only types of ancient painting he would have been familiar with.
Oh, wow.
So in a way, he's using his own unique style to create a visual link to the art of the past.
Wow. This is blowing my mind. Like every time we peel back a layer of this painting, we find even more depth and complexity.
There's a lot going on.
We've talked about Neoplatonism, wedding symbolism, possible Medici connections, ancient Greek poetry, lost masterpieces. I mean, is there anything else?
Well, there's always more to uncover.
Okay.
Remember how we were talking about the Medici family and those possible connections to the painting?
Yeah.
Well, there's one art historian, Charles R. Mack, who has a particularly unique interpretation of the whole thing.
Okay, lay it on me.
Yeah.
What's his take?
Mack believes that the painting is an elaborate allegory celebrating the virtues of Lorenzo de' Medici.
Okay.
But fair warning, this is a pretty controversial theory.
Controversial. I love a good art history debate.
Okay, good. Well, it relies on this idea that the Medici family commissioned the painting,
Okay.
which hasn't actually been proven.
Oh, so it's just a theory.
It's just a theory. But Mack's argument builds on a few things we've already discussed. Like, he thinks Botticelli was deliberately positioning himself as a sort of reborn Apelles,
Okay.
surpassing the ancient master. And there's actually some evidence for this idea. A poet named Ugolino Verino,
Okay.
he wrote a poem in 1488 praising Botticelli as a revitalized Apelles. So that idea was definitely floating around at the time.
Okay, so we've got Botticelli as the new Apelles. How does Lorenzo de' Medici fit into all of this?
Well, Mack believes that even if Lorenzo didn't directly commission the painting, it could have been intended as this grand tribute to him,
Okay.
a way of elevating him to the same level as legendary figures like Alexander the Great.
So it's like a subtle form of Medici propaganda.
Right, hidden in plain sight.
I love it.
And it gets even more intriguing. Remember that popular legend linking the image of Venus to Simonetta Cattaneo Vespucci?
La Bella Simonetta.
Exactly.
Wasn't she considered the most beautiful woman in Florence?
That's right. And here's where things get really interesting. Simonetta was born in a place called Portovenere,
Okay.
which literally means the port of Venus.
Oh, wow.
So Max sees this as a deliberate link between the real-life beauty and the goddess arriving on shore in the painting.
So the layers just keep getting deeper.
They do. So what's the overall message? Well, he's drawing all these parallels.
Okay.
Simonetta, the beautiful model, becomes the modern-day Campaspe.
Okay.
Lorenzo, the powerful patron, becomes the new Alexander the Great.
Okay.
Botticelli, the artistic genius, is the reborn Apelles.
Mm-hmm.
And Florence, the cultural center of the Renaissance, is the new Rome.
Wow.
So
It's like he's weaving together history and mythology and current events into this incredibly complex tapestry.
It's pretty impressive.
But isn't that a bit of a stretch? I mean, is there any real evidence to support this whole Medici connection?
Well, that's the thing about art history. Sometimes we have to rely on educated guesses and interpretations.
Yeah.
Especially when we're dealing with works from centuries ago.
Yeah.
But even if Mack's theory isn't universally accepted, it raises some fascinating questions about the relationship between art and power and patronage in Renaissance Italy.
Right.
That makes you think about the motivations behind artistic creation.
Right.
Who was pulling the strings? And what messages might be hidden beneath the surface?
A whole other level of intrigue. And it makes you wonder if Botticelli's contemporaries would have picked up on all these subtle hints and allusions.
It's possible. You have to remember these were highly educated people steeped in classical literature and philosophy.
Mm,
They would have been attuned to these layers of meaning in a way that we might not be today.
right.
It's like they were playing a very sophisticated game of intellectual hide and seek.
It makes you realize how much context matters when we're trying to understand art from the past. It's not just about what we see on the surface,
Mm-hmm.
but about all the historical and cultural and intellectual currents that shape the work.
You're absolutely right. And speaking of different perspectives, there's one more angle we haven't explored yet.
Oh.
The possibility of a Christian reading of the painting.
A Christian reading. But isn't this painting based on pagan mythology?
It is, but remember that even those seemingly pagan elements could have been interpreted through a Christian lens,
Okay.
especially in the context of Neoplatonic thought,
Right.
which was trying to reconcile classical philosophy with Christian beliefs.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Uh.
Tell me more about this Christian interpretation. What are we looking for here?
Well, for starters, think about Venus's nudity.
Okay.
Some scholars see it as a kind of visual echo of Eve before the fall,
Okay.
representing a state of innocence and pure love, like in the Garden of Eden.
So her arrival on shore about to be clothed could symbolize the transition from innocence to sin, like when Adam and Eve realized they were naked and felt ashamed.
Exactly. And some scholars go even further,
Okay.
suggesting that the clothed Venus, once she puts on that robe, becomes a symbol of the Christian church,
Oh.
offering a way back to that pure eternal love that was lost in the fall. It's like she's offering spiritual salvation.
Wow, that's a powerful image. And what about the scallop shell she's standing on? Doesn't that have some Christian significance too?
It does. Scallop shells were often associated with pilgrimage,
Okay.
especially the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain.
Okay.
So the shell could be seen as a symbol of the spiritual journey, the quest for redemption.
And what about that vast expanse of sea? What does that represent in this Christian reading?
Well, the sea has always been a powerful symbol in Christianity.
Okay.
It represents the unknown,
Yeah.
the chaos that existed before creation, but also the waters of baptism, which cleanse us from sin. And remember, one of the titles given to the Virgin Mary is Stella Maris, which means Star of the Sea.
Oh, wow.
So it connects to both Mary's name and the celestial body Venus, which is often referred to as the morning star.
So there's this subtle link between Venus and the Virgin Mary, both associated with light and guidance and hope.
Exactly. And then there's the image of the sea birthing Venus. Some scholars see a parallel to the Virgin Mary giving birth to Christ,
Oh, wow.
who is, of course, the ultimate symbol of love and redemption in Christianity.
It's incredible how the same elements can take on such different meanings.
It is pretty remarkable. It's the beauty of art, isn't
Yeah.
it? It invites us to see the world through different lenses, to consider multiple perspectives. And I think that's what makes Botticelli's The Birth of Venus so enduringly fascinating.
Yeah.
It doesn't give us easy answers.
Right.
It challenges us to think for ourselves, to engage with its mysteries, and to come to our own conclusions.
I have to admit, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all this information.
I can imagine.
We've covered so much ground. Neoplatonism, wedding celebrations, Medici connections, ancient Greek poetry, lost masterpieces, and now Christian symbolism. I'm starting to think there's no end to the possible interpretations.
And that's perfectly okay.
Okay.
The point isn't to come up with the right answer,
Right.
but to appreciate the richness and complexity of the work.
Right.
The more we learn about it, the more we realize how much we don't know. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's what keeps us coming back for more.
Well, I definitely see this painting in a whole new light now. I'm starting to appreciate all those layers of meaning, all those subtle hints and allusions. It's like Botticelli has given us a puzzle to solve, and we're still piecing it together even after all these centuries.
And maybe that's the point. Maybe the journey is more important than the destination. Maybe the active interpretation of engaging with the work and asking questions is what keeps the painting alive, what gives it its enduring power.
That's a beautiful thought. It's like we're all part of this ongoing conversation with Botticelli, with history, with the very nature of art itself.
Exactly. And I think that's a pretty good place to leave things for. Now, why don't we take a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed
Okay.
and maybe consider what resonates most with us what speaks to us on a personal level.
That sounds like a great idea. We'll be back in a moment to wrap things up and offer some final thoughts for our listeners to ponder.
All right. So I feel like I can finally breathe again
Yeah.
after all those theories and
It's
interpretations.
a lot to take in.
Yeah, we went from like ancient mythology to Renaissance politics to Neoplatonism to Christian symbolism. I
That's
mean,
pretty amazing.
it's a lot.
How much he packed into one painting.
Right. But I guess the big question is like, what does this all mean for us?
Right.
For like the viewer today?
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. It's not like a textbook
Right.
with all the answers.
Right.
It's more like a conversation starter,
Okay.
an invitation to think, to feel, to interpret.
You know, it reflects that complex intellectual world of Botticelli's time,
Okay.
but it also speaks to us across the centuries,
Right.
prompting us to ask our own questions and kind of find our own meaning.
I remember when I first saw The Birth of Venus in person, I was surprised by how small it was.
Yeah, it's smaller than you
In fact, the
think.
colors are so vibrant,
Yeah,
so luminous.
they are incredible.
It really did feel like stepping into this other world
Hmm.
of myth and beauty. So I'm curious what struck you the most when you first saw the painting?
You know, it's funny. What struck me most wasn't Venus herself.
Wow.
It was those wind gods, Zephyr and the nymph.
Oh, okay.
The way Botticelli captured that feeling of wind, of movement, and, of air just swirling around them.
Yeah, very flowy.
It's like you can almost feel the breeze just looking at it.
Yeah.
It's a testament to his skill as an artist,
Right.
his ability to convey not just form,
Right.
but also like energy, atmosphere, a sense of being present in that moment.
It's like he captures this invisible thing.
Right. The wind, the breath of life, and he makes it visible through paint.
Yeah.
It's really pretty incredible. But I also think that sense of ambiguity, the multiple interpretations,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of what makes this painting so captivating. It's
Very
like he's
cool.
saying, here's my creation.
Mm-hmm.
Now make of it what you will.
Right. He's not giving us all the answers.
Right.
There's no single definitive interpretation.
Right.
And maybe that was intentional. He leaves it open for each viewer
Right.
to bring their own experiences, their own knowledge,
Mhm.
their own way of seeing the world to the painting.
Yeah.
It's a work that encourages dialogue, debate, even disagreement.
Right.
And that's what keeps it relevant. That's what keeps people talking about it centuries later.
So are you saying there's no right way to interpret the birth of Venus?
Well, I think there are more and less plausible readings,
Okay.
interpretations that are more grounded in the historical context
Okay.
and in Botticelli's artistic choices. But ultimately, the meaning you take away from the painting is personal.
Okay.
It's about what resonates with you,
Right.
what speaks to your own experience of beauty, of love, of the world around you.
It's like a mirror,
Mm-hmm.
reflecting back not just Botticelli's vision, but also our own.
I like that.
And so that brings us back to the enduring power of this painting.
Right.
Why do you think it continues to fascinate people even in the 21st century?
I think it's a combination of things. It's the beauty, of course,
Right.
that sheer visual appeal.
Yeah.
It's the story it tells, this timeless myth of birth,
Mm-hmm.
of transformation,
Right.
of beauty emerging from chaos.
Right.
But it's also the mystery,
The mystery.
the layers of meaning,
Right.
the questions that it raises that keep us coming back for more.
Yeah.
It's a work that invites us to slow down,
Yeah.
to contemplate, to connect with something larger than ourselves.
We've talked about all these very complex interpretations, the Neoplatonism and the Christian symbolism and the Medici allegories, but maybe at its heart,
Mm-hmm.
the birth of Venus is really just a celebration of beauty,
Yeah.
a reminder of the power of art to
Mhm.
transport us, to inspire us, to make us feel more alive
I think you've hit the nail on the head.
in a world that often feels very chaotic and confusing.
Mm-hmm.
The birth of Venus offers us a glimpse of something pure,
Right.
something transcendent,
Mhm.
something that speaks to our deepest longings.
I agree.
So I think it's about time to bring our deep dive to a close.
Okay.
But before we do, is there any final thought that you would like to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were just saying about the personal nature of interpretation.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to engage with a painting on your own terms.
Okay.
Let it speak to you. What do you see in those colors, in those forms, in those faces? What emotions does it evoke in you? The answers might surprise you.
Right.
And maybe, just maybe, you'll discover something new. Not just about the painting, but about yourself.
That's a beautiful way to wrap things up.
Thank you.
So to all of our listeners out there, we encourage you to dive deeper into the world of Botticelli's The Birth of Venus. Explore its mysteries, ponder its meanings, and let it spark your own imaginations.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe you'll uncover a whole new layer of meaning, a perspective that no one has ever seen before.
That would be amazing.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating journey into the world of art history and ideas.